The iPhone XR is basically the iPhone XS with an ever so slightly worse display. That's it. That's the whole thing. It's got the same A12 Bionic processor, the same main camera with Smart HDR, and iOS 12. Instead of the edge-to-edge OLED on the XS, there's a 6.1-inch liquid retina LCD. It has a lower resolution and pixel density than the OLEDs in new flagship phones like the XS, the Galaxy S9, and the Pixel 3, but if you're upgrading from a previous LCD iPhone, it's going to look really familiar. Size-wise, the XR sits right between the old iPhone 6, 7, 8 sized phones and the bigger Plus models. I have pretty big hands, so this feels like a nice size compromise to me, but if you've had the smaller phones, the XR is definitely going to feel big. I'd recommend going to the Apple Store and holding this thing before you buy it because it's a totally new size of the iPhone, and it's different than anything you might be familiar with. This is our third shot at reviewing Apple's new Smart HDR camera system after the iPhone XS review and the Pixel 3 review, and we wanted to do something a little bit different. So Verge video producer Maria Abdulkaf and I ran around Brooklyn and took a bunch of photos that look a lot like what you'd see every day on Instagram. This photo of Maria against a bright backlight would be challenging for any camera, and you can see how the iPhone XR brought down the highlights in the background, lifted the shadows on Maria's face, and warmed everything up, while the Pixel exposed Maria correctly and let the background highlights blow out way more naturally. The Pixel also captured more detail on Maria's face. I much prefer the Pixel here. It's the same thing with selfies. The iPhone brought up the shadows so much that it made the black jacket turn gray. It almost looks like we shot this photo with a fill flash, and there's far less detail in Maria's face. Again, I really prefer the contrasty look of the Pixel 3 photo. Okay, here's a really hard one. Low light with weird lighting in a bar. I think most people will prefer the iPhone here, but it also doesn't actually look like reality. The iPhone found Maria's face, exposed it correctly with the right skin tone, and then flattened all the highlights and lifted all the shadows to make the scene look even. The Pixel 3, on the other hand, does a much better job of capturing the strange red light in this room, even if the photo is a lot darker and weirder. Now, do you want a photo that's more accurate to reality or more pleasant to look at? I cannot tell you. It's a really subjective decision. The XR only has a single lens on the back, and I'm just going to come out and say that I don't miss having the second lens from the XS at all. Check out this photo we took on the riverfront where I was able to capture the sign in the background. It just wasn't possible to get this shot in portrait mode on the XS or the Pixel 3, which crops in for portrait mode. The XR's portrait mode also has Apple's nice fall-off blur, which looks more like a real bokeh than the sort of bad cutout blur you see from the Pixel 3. In terms of performance, the XR was basically identical to the XS in day-to-day use, and it even hit close to the same benchmark numbers in some quick tests. The XR also has a larger battery than the 10 and the XS. It ran for about 13 hours in my everyday use of browsing, email, Slack, and various apps. That's about 6 hours of screen on time, which is a little bit more than the XS and way more than the 8 Plus from last year. If one thing is clear about the iPhone XR, it's that Apple's going to sell tons of these. They're huge upgrades from the iPhone 6, 7, 8 generation with Apple's latest processor and cameras, a big screen and updated design, and a competitive opening price of $750. And honestly, when we first started making this video, it felt like the big question would be about what you're losing with the XR compared to the XS. But now that I've used this thing for a while, that's flipped in my mind. The real question for iPhone buyers is whether spending $250 more on the XS is really worth it over the XR, because the XR offers almost everything you'd want in a 2018 phone, minus the OLED display.